welcome to Spotlight on the Rosa Parks Museum. My name is Georgette Norman, director of the museum, and my guest is E. Bruce Phillips, Jr., our current exhibitor in the museum gallery. And his exhibit is called Different Perspectives. Welcome, Bruce.
Hello, Georgette. How are you?
While I know that you are not a native Montgomeryan or a native Alabamian, you have deep roots here and actually dedicated your exhibit to those roots. Your grandmother, Ollie Phillips, your father, Bruce Sr., and your uncle, Harper T. Can you give us some reason why it was important for you to dedicate this particular exhibit to them?
It's, well, thank you for having me, Georgette. It was very important to me when I was given the opportunity to have the exhibition here at the Rosa Parks Museum. Coming from the Atlanta area, I thought it was ironic that when we decided to purchase a home here in Montgomery, I realized that the house that we purchased was about a mile away from the location where my father, my uncle, and my grandmother lived for many years. And I remember the fond memories of visiting Montgomery as a child. And so when I came here, that energy of my family hit me immediately when I came to Montgomery.
Can you mind telling the audience who your grandmother was?
Yes, it was Ollie Phillips. She was an educator here with a lab high school title with Alabama State University, and she was also, I know someone who was a student of hers.
Yes, and I'm sure she has many students in the audience. And
Yes.
everybody, as I talked about this exhibit, people were very excited about meeting you and seeing your artwork, and we are as well. I want to talk a little bit about your art, and oftentimes people that pursue careers in art, parents tell them, oh, you can make any money, don't be doing this, get you a real job and make some money. You actually had an uncle who was an artist, so did you have those same arguments coming from your parents?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
It's like, don't be like your uncle. In other
Yes,
words,
yes. And now, actually, when that happens, I think it can be that much harder when you're trying to establish yourself as a person, especially in the field of the arts. And yes, growing up, I wanted to be in the arts all along, and it was not until probably my second or third year of college that I decided I wanted to pursue a creative field, which was architecture. But I did not complete that degree because a lot of the architectural renderings and things that people do were being done on a computer. The CAD programs, computer-aided design. And so that really turned me away from the field a little bit. I always appreciate architecture. As you can see, I incorporate it into my work quite a bit.
Definitely.
But it was another about 10 years before I really decided to take up art full time.
Okay. And did you actually study at that point in time, or did you just start doing it?
At first, I started doing it. I finished my undergraduate degree from Morehouse College in marketing, the creative side of business. So I decided to, when I was actually working at Lockheed, and was at Lockheed at the time when they closed their California plant, and I saw a lot of people relocate to the Marietta area where I was working, and I got caught in the layoffs along with a lot of people who had relocated with their families, and I saw a lot of things, go on at the, level where people were losing jobs and everything, and at that point I saw that I wanted to do something with the rest of my life that I enjoyed doing, and art was the main thing that I wanted to do, and so I actually started just practicing. I took up a lot of techniques I learned when I was in architecture, of course working with a graphite pencil, pencil sets, pastels, and I picked up acrylic paints, which I never touched before, and decided to start playing around. And lo and behold, I ended up accumulating enough work for a portfolio, and I began to start submitting it, looking at graduate schools.
Interesting. I met you when you came to the museum because Charlie Palmer was here.
Yes.
And I'm hearing now that Charlie also was doing marketing, but always had a passion for art.
That's
and
correct.
now I'm hearing you were in marketing with also a passion for art.
Yes.
When you got your portfolio together, what did you do with it? Where'd you end up going?
I went to a couple of the schools in the Atlanta area, which are obvious places, just I guess to just test out my immediate environment. And a friend of mine mention this college I had kind of heard of on the periphery, the Savannah College of Art and Design, better known as SCAD. And they were having a portfolio review, I think that same month when I was making these decisions. And so I actually had a friend shoot some slides of my artworks that I had created and took it down to a portfolio review and got a very good reception from some professors at the college, and they encouraged me to go on and submit an application.
Very good. Yes. Your portfolio, how close is the work that we're looking at that is all in progress, I should say? How close is this work to what you had in that portfolio? Or how far away is this work from what you had in that portfolio?
Well, that's a pretty heavy question because I tend to be hypercritical about works that I've created even last year, because I think as people we just grow and we develop. But when I'm not being hypercritical about some of my older works from my former life, I tend to I see a lot of similarities. My experimentation with color, experimentation with form and space, even my experimentation with some of the subtle imagery that you see, whether it be a human figure or some architecture. So I'm playing around with some of the same concepts. Before I used to really get off into even looking at cells, because a lot of times when I was supposed to be in science class reading the textbook, I was looking at the microscope, looking at cells and organisms, really looking at how you see repetition or the lack of repetition, in a lot of these cells and organisms.
And I can see that in your work as well. And I also noticed that, like me, you talk with your hands. And I see you using your hands a lot. And in your work, you have a signature. And it's almost like most people would sit with a pencil and they'll doodle and write around. There's this little squiggly kinds of lines that you find in all of your work. Yes. Did that come about by accident, or is it by design?
Wow, that's, I'd say a little bit of both. It was through experimentation, and I guess that's where the accident happened and it became a part of the design. I look at it, my mark now, and I really see similarities in my handwriting that I use. And if you put my handwriting next to my work, you can tell that it's mine. And it's my natural movement, my natural mark. One of the first things I learned when I took a Drawing 1 class, one of the first things I teach my students in the classroom is to look at the marks that people have done before. And it's usually a cross-hatch mark, a curve cross, a contour hatch mark that you make. And a lot of people usually stay, right there with that because it's comfortable. I took it and I kept seeing other artists, in my marks that I was making. And so this was just something that I can't really identify when it started. I guess I can look at some of my past works and really see where it began to evolve.
So your signature is kind of all over the piece.
That's correct.
As opposed to not being. Now you mentioned earlier about observing people losing their jobs, looking at just your society around you. And as one looks at your work, so much of it has a great deal of social commentary. Did your work always have social commentary, or did that evolve as you began to notice your surroundings a lot more?
Well, no, my work did not include. I think there were some areas where I wanted it to be in my work, but it would just didn't come out. A lot of times it was the use of color that I may be using, or the placement of objects. A lot of more design elements were in the work. But I've always been into social situations, social commentary. I guess that's what led me into the arts, finding something that I really want to do after seeing the things that have happened to other people, that were happening to other people. And I've always had my antenna out for those type of things. As of recently, my wife and myself always talk about current events, always talk about current topics. We listen to public radio, public television all the time. And I think that's where we can get some of our best source of news, just to take a broader look at images and just different activities going on in our society right now. Yeah,
as you look at your work, it's not only is there a local flavor in terms of what's happening, but there is really a global, and it looks like the interdependency You know, that none of us are like an alone or an entity unto ourselves, but we all kind of connected to this. And I think these those squiggly lines that you, your signature, I should say, excuse me, clearly kind of does that. And I'm looking at the piece behind you that, to me, very much, I know you say it's like the mother and child and Madonna piece with the light and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that piece and the integration in it? From her dress to the background and so forth, and your light.
Yes, you mentioned the mark, and that is my way that I do tie figures, forms, the architectural elements that you see at the top of the composition in order to bring those together. The Madonna and Child really evolved from a theme that I've just enjoyed hearing about, enjoyed looking at from Sunday school, learning about mother and child and Madonna and child. And I wanted to just, I guess you say, like you say, bring an international flavor into this image. If you look on the right side, I have a young boy. As I mentioned, these pieces aren't finished yet, but I would like to bring the young guy outside of the church on the side, and there's a cross, and on the cross it says, "All are welcome." And that's just something that I just wanted to put out to people when they look at this, that, all children, should be welcome. In our society, we tend to look at things a little bit differently. And I think we really need to look at the kids and what's really taking place right now in our society.
Well, that's special, coming from birth, the infant, to the young child. Very, very much so. And it's interesting, too, because until you told me, I had no idea that this was tissue paper in her dress. Clearly, we talk about recycling a great deal, but you clearly recycle, reuse, renew, rejuvenate, all of it, and create this wonderful art. And it's interesting because the tissue paper is used in a way that it looks like your signature. Now, did you start out to do that?
Yes.
That is, yeah, that's...
I started with the tissue paper by laying it flat on the board, and it mimics so many other collage elements that I've seen before. And so I decided to say, if I could do this with a drawing or a painting utensil, I could do this with tissue paper or an object.
It's incredible. Thank you. The other thing I think is very interesting about all of your work, we'll talk about some of it later, is your use of, because it is a collage. And it's very difficult to tell where the photograph or whatever you're using ends and your painting begins. I mean, do you put the photograph or the picture there and then extend it, or are you doing it and find a picture that kind of goes with it?
I do a little bit of both. That's a great question. And sometimes I don't even know when I start the piece is where it's going. And a lot of times I'll look back at, one of the 7 or 8 series that I'm, playing around with in my work. The images that I use, I do a lot of form, a lot of placement, a lot of, what would go well here, how about the spacing, what will look good. I guess you could say feng shui on the board.
Wow.
Just looking at the placement of objects, is it too close? Is it too far away from the other? Should I incorporate a figure into this? Should it be about the just the imagery that we're looking at?
And speaking of that, there's a piece behind you that is blue with all these little things that we look at in terms of water. We've had a lot of water lately.
We sure
have. A lot of water that we can't seem to turn off. And all these little valves, they aren't working. And it's an interesting kind of piece. I'd be interested to see where that one's going to lead in light of, especially, your take on social commentary, your thematic kinds of things, and what's happening right now, as recent as yesterday, pretty much, in Birmingham, Alabama. Another piece I'm very interested in, we're talking about architectural renderings. You have a piece here, I'm not really sure the camera can pick it up, but again, very definitely deals with architecture and deals with perspective and depth. It's amazing how you're able to get those kind of dimensions on something that narrow, and stuff like this. But this piece that I've been watching develop, and when I was talking earlier about looking at how you incorporate all of this as we come from, and it's very interesting in terms of looking at the little holes and stuff here,
Mm-hmm.
looking at your signature on the dancer's body, but also seeing this here. Now, did you put that there? Was that a part of the photograph? This little.
Actually, those are part of the photograph, and actually I did a little bit to weather it a little bit to blend it and merge the piece together.
That's, I mean, it's amazing.
Thank you.
It is amazing. Can you kind of look? Could you kind of explain this to us a little bit?
Yes, this is one of the, as I mentioned before, the 7 or 8 series that I'm working with. This is one of the series that I'm doing, and it actually merges into a couple of different areas. As we mentioned before, the architecture is one of the pure elements that I deal with, as you mentioned in this piece. The dancers. Dancers, music is another element that I play around with in my work. Social commentary, as we mentioned before, the found object and assemblage work with found objects. But this piece, I enjoy performance art. I enjoy the movement of the human body. And something I've always been amazed with. And whenever I, will see someone dancing, I'll look at a move that they do and I try to freeze it. Because a lot of times when our bodies move, especially when someone's dancing, a professional's dancing, it's hard to really capture a movement in time and in space. And when I, drew this movement on the board, I wanted something to complement that movement. And therefore the image of the, that architectural rendering on the right side of it gives that kind of a feel of a vortex, and you're not quite sure if this person is spinning to the right, to the left, up, or down, and that's one of the things I wanted to portray.
Like in space, in space. And what about this little section here that's really radiating all this out?
Kind of a sun ray, sunburst. We deal with light all the time, and I'm always intrigued with light. I'm always intrigued with shadows, that are created by the light. But this one, I just wanted everything to kind of radiate outward.
And it's really interesting because this very light there comes out, and then it kind of goes with the dancer. And so the dancer's kind of coming out of it and doing that whole kind of thing. But now this piece is the piece, I guess, is at its earliest stage.
Yes.
Compared to the others. And we can get a sense here of looking at your signature on the one hand, and then also seeing you playing with the signature also as you deal with the face and that piece. And again, they're dancers.
Yes.
So as you look at a piece like this, and as I'm looking at the wood, I don't know whether you put this stuff in there or I'm actually seeing stuff come out of it.
And you mentioned a great thing, the wood that you see in there. There's so much beauty around us, and a lot of times as artists we tend to take a piece of wood as what I like to work on, and we paint right over, we gesso right over the top of it, and we lose that natural grain that you see in the wood. With this piece, I wanted the wood to actually become part of the composition. And if you look at some of the marks and the way I've manipulated my marks, they're complementing the wood grains and some of the knots that you find in the wood.
Absolutely. Now this is a part of your dance series.
That's
okay.
correct.
Now there are several different series that you have. There's a dance one, you've mentioned that one, and you've mentioned the architectural series. You have a beautiful series of street scenes. How did that come about?
Street scenes are something, as we mentioned before, just looking at our society, looking at the things that are around us or not around us. I came up in a generation where people played outside, where you saw automobiles, but they were there in order to get us from point A to point B. We live in our cars now. We stay in the house. We're hooked up and we're connected in our homes. But the street scenes came from just my want to see that again, to see people walking down the street, to see people playing in the neighborhoods, to see people just interacting with one another.
Getting back out into the world instead of closing themselves
That's
off,
right,
off
closing
from it.
off.
It's very interesting to see where this one leads. Now, your dancers all seem to be like ballet. Is that your dance of choice? Or do you have any dancers that aren't ballet dancers?
I do have dancers that are not ballet. Actually, in the exhibition, I have just a couple just purely dancing, and I wanted to incorporate them into kind of a party or a club type scene, and kind of bring it down because, yeah, when you look at ballet, as well as other art forms of other areas of ballet and dance, you I guess we tend to look at ballet as just that highest form, that purest form of dance. But there are so many. I start looking at dance now, and I see so much similarity across the board in all the different types of dance. So, you know, in the future, I probably will play around with other types of dance movements.
What's really beautiful about all of your ballet dance pieces, they are in the world. They're not, like you just mentioned how they're able to move like almost high art,
Yes.
but you actually have them as a part of the world. And the few that are in the exhibit are just phenomenal. Your signature piece that's actually, when you first walk into the museum, is a prime example of that, where the world, I mean, the person is dancing, but the entire world is there. So it's a part of it. And it's like drawing it all up into that body, into that one, as opposed to being something just kind of outside all of that. I have one question I want to ask you in terms of you've told us that the idea that you had to be an artist. You know, you tried this other stuff, but you had to be an artist. Right. So obviously it feeds your soul. But it also feeds an audience. What do you hope that people get? What kind of food do you hope they get, a nourishment they get when they see your work?
With my work, I want the viewer to bring their experience. I want them to bring their knowledge that they have, because a lot of times we tend to think that we don't know a lot about art. And I want people to just bring their story to my work. And with my titles, I try to guide the viewer a little bit into the piece, but at the same time, I would prefer for them to bring their own interpretation into the work. But from my work, I like for people to enjoy my colors that I use, because colors are very important to me. I think they're important to all of us, how we just really vibe off of colors. And each piece I try to set a different tone. My social commentary and some of the other different series that I do, I use a lot of metaphors in my work, and I hope that viewers pick up. And I've had a lot of good feedback about my work, and I like to hear people tell me what they see in the work, and a lot of these things are things that I thought about when I'm creating the artwork.
So it's glad to know that it resonates with them.
Yes.
I think one of the things that's very powerful in your work is taking ordinary kinds of things, and they remain in the ordinary, but you're forcing us to see them in terms of what they are. I mean, there's a wonderful piece that you have, I call it Shooting Craps. That's your education piece.
Yes.
I've forgotten, what do you call it? It has a name.
By any means necessary.
By any means necessary.
Yes, you could be shooting craps, because I think that's what we're doing with our children's education.
And it's a wonderful piece and I call it that because it's a piece, a beautiful collage piece, but it has dye, about four dice just kind of on it. And I'm going like, oh my God, so true. You know, we are.
Yes.
You know, and so I mean, it forces us to think about issues that we don't normally think about in that kind of way. So in many cases, it gives us new language to deal with issues that we need to be confronting. And so we are most appreciative of that. The exhibit is getting really wonderful reviews. The young people are really loving it. And I wanted to ask you, as you think about being an artist and going to art school, you know, was there any struggle with you being able to do what you wanted to do and present yourself as Bruce, as opposed to if you're trying to put you into a little box to make you do something else?
Yes, I think for any person that decides to explore their creativity, it's all within us, but a lot of times we tend to, society may stifle it, things with, you know, around the closest to us sometimes stifle. But yes, when you decide to go in there and make that decision to explore it, that's just only the first part of it, because once you begin that, and especially in a official capacity of academia, when you're looking at your work, yes, there's certain boxes that you have to fit into that you need to know about, but I think that's good in everybody's development in order to do that. But really making things yours, you know, coming up with your own voice. But for me, that was one of the hardest things to do. to bring my voice out to the forefront. And that, I'm not saying that I've 100% done that, because
Still
I
evolving.
see it still evolving. I think we do that
Sure.
until we no longer
Or here.
dealing on this plane. Yes.
But and that's fantastic. I think one of the things that says to young people is, people say, like, well, I can't draw, I can't whatever. And it's not about drawing.
No.
It's about using the creative energy within
That's
and
great.
allowing it to come out.
Right.
And I think when people see your work, it's like, wow. And it gets people to think. And that's what an artist does. An artist gets us to think about those things in ways we don't normally think about it.
I appreciate
Thank you so much for coming. It's been my pleasure.
it. Georgia, thank you very much.
Yeah, this been, oh my God, and I'm looking forward to seeing what this one becomes. Yes.
Me too.
Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Georgette Norman, Director of Rosa Parks Museum, here with E. Bruce Phillips with his exhibit, Different Perspectives. I hope he get a chance to visit us at the museum, and look forward to seeing you the next time on Spotlight on the Rosa Parks Museum.